Yes, Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Speaker, Labor has supported this bill because it supports an effective and timely process for progressing Auckland City's unitary plan. What we don't support, sir, is the appalling process that this legislation has been followed. This bill, sir, was announced by the Minister on the 16th of September. That's more than 2 months ago. That was plenty of time, sir, for this bill to have been read a first time in mid-September, gone to a select committee, the public given a chance to have its voice heard on the bill, the select committee given the chance to scrutinise the bill carefully for any errors or things that didn't look likely to make the changes that people thought were necessary, and for the Parliamentary Council Office and for officials to be quizzed on whether the bill will achieve what the objective of the bill is set out to do. Did that happen, sir? No. Why didn't it happen? Throughout every stage of this bill, no adequate explanation has been given to the House as to why, instead of proper process and normal process, this bill was introduced at 25 to 11 o'clock last night, pushed through its stages. And what the government could have done during those committee stages, the Committee of the Whole, Mr Speaker, is to have the Minister in charge of the bill in the chair and ready to answer questions legitimately put to him by members of this House. Did that happen, Mr Speaker? No, it didn't happen. We had Minister after Minister sit dumbly in the Minister's chair in the House, ignoring the questions. One Minister finally got up and gave a 40-second answer, which was then wrong.
Point of order. The Honourable Louise Upson.
Mr Speaker, it's a well-traversed convention in this House not to refer to the absence of any member at any time.
Yes.
Speaker.
The Honourable Phil Goff.
It is not against standing orders to say the Minister in charge of the bill was not in the chair.
Yes. Well, the matter's been traversed. Of course, the Honourable Phil Goff referred to the Minister not being in the chair, not being in the House. The Honourable Phil Goff.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the huge irony of the debate over this bill during the stages it's gone through is that, as well as seeking to facilitate an effective process of hearing submissions by the independent hearing panel, the bill had a second purpose. The second purpose was to validate legislation that had been rushed through the House previously on this very same issue, and to correct the errors and to retrospectively make legal what had been done illegally. Now, I say irony, sir, because the lesson of that, surely there were 3 instances where we had to validate legislation that was inadequate and where activity was not legally being performed. The lesson of that to the government was surely that you don't rush legislation through, that you give it proper consideration, and then you've got a better chance of getting it right. But we, again, at the government's insistence, have seen legislation rushed through that is bound to come back to the House because it is not adequate. Mr Speaker, despite that appalling process, for which not one single national member sought to justify the process being followed, the Labor Party supports the intent of this bill. The goal of the legislation to bring in the super city in Auckland was to bring together 8 separate councils into one to cover an area that is in effect one city. And the next step that is necessary to realise the benefits of that, sir, is to replace 13 district and regional plans with a single unitary plan for resource management. That means, sir, that we can put behind Auckland a history of complex and fragmented resource management planning, and we can hopefully facilitate quicker and more environmentally sustainable development, both rural, urban and in the marine environment. And in order to make this process happen more quickly, there was a decision made that I support, that instead of a 10-year process under the Resource Management Act, previous legislation set up a system where the council would notify the unitary plan, and then an independent hearing panel would hear submissions on that plan and would recommend back to council. Well, that independent hearing panel, chaired by Judge David Kirkpatrick, has done a very good job. They've heard about 9,000 submissions. But in the last part of this process, we are looking at site-specific issues. And there are 5,000 submitters who want to be heard. And the statutory deadline for the independent hearing panel to report back to council is the 22nd of July 2016. It didn't look like they were going to make that deadline, and it benefits nobody for the bringing into effect of the unitary plan to be further held up. And that's why this bill makes 3 changes that the Labor opposition supports. It will reduce the quorum, it will increase the pool of hearing panel members which can be drawn upon, it will allow the panel to report back after each issue that it deals with its recommendations, and it will allow panels, more than one panel, to sit simultaneously. Now, those things, sir, are good, and we support that, and that is why we are supporting the bill. What we weren't able to do in the Committee of the Whole, however, was to get answers to certain questions that were validly raised. And one question was, if you reduce the quorum to 2 and you've got 2 members on a planning panel, a hearing panel, what if they disagree? What sort of recommendation are they going to give back to the council? Well, the Minister did take a call on that one to say they wouldn't be making a recommendation. I'm sorry, sir, the point of the independent hearing panel is to make recommendations to council, and who would make that recommendation but the people who heard the submissions on it? So the answer was a nonsense, and time and again we could not get answers on whether this will do exactly what everybody in this House might want it to do. The failure of the government to allow this to go to a select committee also meant that we weren't able to challenge the Minister in charge of the bill in terms of the claims that he makes for it. And I want to quote him on 2 claims. First of all, he said the bill was needed before the expiry of the special housing area legislation, and that would have bad effects. Well, what I would like to have asked the Minister is, what bad effect would that have? The Minister has set a target of 39,000 new houses over 3 years, and when the Council was asked last week how many of those houses 2 years into the 3-year period had been built in special housing areas, the answer was 102. 102 out of the 39,000 target. So, first of all, it's very hard to accept from the Minister that special housing areas have been effective. They haven't. They've been a dramatic failure. The second thing the Minister has said, and I quote him, this bill is needed to maintain the momentum of lifting Auckland's housing supply. Now, I hope, sir, that the new unitary plan will facilitate addressing the crisis in the availability and the affordability of houses in Auckland. The Productivity Commission has said very clearly the problem with Auckland is there's going to be 1 million more people in the next 30 years, and we've got restrictive laws that won't let the city move out and it won't let the city move up. Now, if that happens, they said, the only area that is affected by those pressures is price and affordability. And that has impacted on price and affordability. Land is more than half of the cost of a new home. So we hope that the new unitary plan will allow properly the city to expand, balancing out the needs to protect the most valuable rural land, and we hope that it will allow the city to go up, balancing out the need for good urban design and plenty of public open space. So to the extent that the unitary plan can help, we support that. But I absolutely challenge the Minister in his claim that this bill is going to resolve Auckland's housing crisis. And I challenge that on the basis of
I'm sorry
the
to
fact
interrupt the member, but his time has expired.